Hey, everybody. Nice to see you. It is time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors, journalists, anybody who is writing stuff so you can get the inside and find out what's going on. That's the buzz. And in our second segment today, you're going to love it. It's an environmentalist, but he's really an artist. I'm not sure which is first. I think he's probably an artist first and then became an environmentalist. And he creates some of the most important creations that you will ever see. And he has some real interesting perspectives. But let's get started right now with the senior staff writer at the Bronx Times. It is my friend, Robbie Sequeria. Nice to see you, Robbie.
Pleasure to be on here as always, Gary.
Robbie, as I told you beforehand, you're just doing a great job. Excuse me. There's so much that you're working on, and what you're. I hope people will check out the Bronx Times and read Robbie's work because they're doing great. Let's just start with this. I thought this was ironic, given all the stuff that Alyssa and you and the people at the paper have been talking about. Is the Fortune Society? This is your headline. Scrapped a planned men's reentry facility in Morrisania. So people in the East Bronx have got to be saying, well, wait a minute. They did it because they didn't like the community response to the idea. And then the proposal at Jacobi Medical Center, the Just Home proposal, is they're saying, well, why not us? Is that a fair question? I mean, what do you make of all this?
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
It's hard not to ask that question.
I can understand where there are maybe hurt feelings aside. I think for this project, it's important to understand that this district, so Community District 3, they have a lot of shelters and transitional living facilities in their district. We've done a couple of math, and I believe it's there's a 4 community district area that involves this district where there's 63 temporary living facilities within 21 square miles. So there's been a lot of issues with, hey, we already have enough of these shelters, and really what we want is affordable housing or permanent housing at least. And these arguments aren't, I think they're different than the Just Home arguments, because Just Home arguments were kind of more, we don't want X amount of people here in this district. Whereas this is we have way too many of these type of shelters.
So then the question, which is a little esoteric and outside of really the bounds of what you've written about, then the ultimate question is saturation, whether or not, and then that leads to the political question of, does every district have to have either equal amount or contribute to the solution to this problem?
I know that's something that the mayor has said many times, that, each district is going to kind of get they're going to have to get one eventually, particularly because the city has, high numbers of people who are homeless, particularly if you don't have eviction protections, people then become homeless. So, there's a lot of particular issues in terms of where you're going to house people. If you have districts that don't have some, you have districts that have way too many. The one thing that I think is really kind of, I think, a promising thing is that both the Fortune Society and the community board members, they can't, I think part of politics and part of in the polarized climate is that both of these sides kind of saw each other's point of view, and they were able to go, hey, maybe we shouldn't have one here, but there wasn't kind of this kind of mudslinging or or at least kind of any type of narratives against the people who need this type of housing, which to me, I think is kind of more positive note that, the Fortune Society might be able to do business with this community district in the future.
I understand what you're saying. And I appreciate that, because some people might avoid that discussion. But if you really covered it like you have covered it, and Alyssa and everybody at the paper, then you'd have to, the only evaluation could be that the dialogue got pretty vile. I mean, what can I tell you? It really was, and especially in the Bronx, it's just hard to deny that, man, if you can't just accept all people of all types with all economic backgrounds or whatever, then boy, oh boy, I mean, it's anyway, let's move on. Here was something I thought that was interesting, was this whole elephant captivity bill. And of course, the residents of the Bronx, and they, I suppose, deserve rights like everybody else. The elephants have been longtime residents of the Bronx. I haven't looked it up, but probably longer than both of us. The elephants actually won, and now the Bronx Zoo has to deal with that, which is whether it's expensive, whether it's land. I'm
Mhm.
not even into that. What do you make of this whole thing that the Bronx politicians then came out? I don't want to say against the elephants, but in favor of the Bronx Zoo.
Yeah. It's this is so I've been following this goodness probably since I started the Bronx Times. This was initially a high profile court case at the Court of Appeals, highest court in the land, and it was basically Happy Elephant was the kind of the subject of. There's two Bronx elephants at the zoo, and they were trying to kind of argue on half of habeas corpus, that prevents against wrongful imprisonment against on behalf of the elephant. So the Court of Appeals didn't exactly see it that way. And so Councilmember Shahana Hanif, she proposed this legislation that would stipulate an animal enclosure, which is there's got to be acre differences. There has to be,
Right.
they can't be in solitary because they're herd animals. And really, the politician response and in the Bronx Zoo's response really is that number one, the Bronx Zoo has really been lauded for its conservation efforts. The alligators.
Well earned.
Yeah,
Well
the,
earned.
the alligators are a big example. They're
Yes.
they haven't in 2006 they decided not to have more elephants. So there kind of is an argument that's like, well, these two elephants are going to be kind of living their last days here, and the Bronx Zoo is the organization that's I guess the most readily to accept them and keep them housed and keep them stable for the rest of their lives. And so there's kind of I think a solidarity moment amongst the Bronx that was like,
Right.
leave the elephants
Well,
alone.
I'm sure it would be a fascinating time to be sitting around the table with the people of the Wildlife Conservation Society when they sit around and say, "What do we do about this?" And it's not only with these, but are we never? I mean, the elephants in the Bronx Zoo is iconic for generations. I mean, every one of us remembers what it looks like. I just as an aside, I once did a show right in front of that elephant area, that historic area where the elephants are. And while we started the show, the guy was throwing out food so that the elephant would walk by and go back and forth. He was throwing out like bushels of carrots and whatever. Anyway, that's an aside. Here's another issue that is raging. We're just moving. Believe me, we could spend
Yeah,
a lot
please.
of time on each one. This is raging throughout the Bronx. The Montefiore nurses went on strike and they got a settlement. I mean, there's still some question as to whether or not the settlement works and whether nurses will ultimately be happy. So you wrote about Jacobi Hospital seeing 20% of its nurses quit in 2022. And the bottom line here is the nursing shortage. And I must add that the nurses at Lincoln Hospital are saying, wait a minute, if they got that kind of solution at Montefiore, whoa, the job is no less or no more. Well, maybe it is more difficult down at Lincoln Hospital. I don't know. But, we do the same job. Why don't we get the same money?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Robbie, solve my problem.
yeah. I mean, there's been, I would say that this city has seen a lot of labor movements in the past, year. I mean, it's, he says evergreen, but nursing has really been the big one. The year started off with private sector nurses striking and ultimately getting fair contracts out of that. And so for the public sector nurses, it's different because when their contract expires, it still is in place until a new one's negotiated. Particularly because losing those public sector nurses would lead to detrimental effects in healthcare. But there's also a $19,000 pay disparity between private sector nurses and public sector nurses. And public sector nurses are like, why are we not seeing that? There was a deal that was in place in the 1990s that the city reported first that talked about kind of this clause that was in place that kind of prevented them to be within the same pay scale as entry-level private sector nurses, and they want that eliminated too as well. So it's really interesting. In the interim, as a lot of these nurses have left, whether it's due to burnout, whether it's due to discrepancy in their pay, Jacobi's had to fill in with temporary nurses who do make about double or triple the salary of the nurses currently there, which is probably another.
So like, where are you saving your money?
Yeah,
what's the real savings here? Like,
and talking to like a temp nurse, you're talking to a temp nurse.
I'm going to let you finish, and I know what I want to say. Go ahead.
Yeah, talking to a temp nurse, they said it's a pretty unsustainable model if you're going to do it for more than say like a month or two to continue relying on temporary services. And Jacobi told me that, they are really hoping to not have to rely on temporary nurses. But this is one of those issues that I think when it comes to the degree of difficulty, the degree of need that nurses are, as we've seen with the private sector nurses, when you lose that power, that workforce power, you're going to see a disruption in services.
And that workforce power comes from their motivation, because this is very difficult work. But if you love the work and you love the people and you think you're doing a good job, but if that breaks down through a contract negotiation, through work, and the nursing shortage is all over the place. What I just want to say is, nurses we have nothing if we don't have nurses. You look at the pandemic and look what they went through and what we went through. Without them, we have nothing. I'll tell you real quick, because we are running out of time. Years ago, Freddie Ferrer was on my program. He had been in the hospital. I asked him how he was doing, et cetera, et cetera. And his answer was, nurses, one thing I learned, nurses are the greatest people in the world. And we're really running out of time. But what I will say, to me, the solution in the Bronx to this is the Lehman College nursing building that's going up right next door to where BronxNet is located. We've got to just train more nurses. And then once we do that, I'll make this the last question. Is there a way to, whether it's legislation or something else, to create a base pay, or to create, is it a union thing? Is it a governmental thing? How do we make it? Because there's no reason the private nurses should make more or less, or anybody should make more. This is what the job is,
Yeah, I think
and everybody else socialism. So I don't know how to solve this problem.
I think it's with all industries. I know it's the same in my industry. You have to, I think, let your employers need to know how much the time spent is time done. And not only that, there's work that is done that is not exactly added into a salary. That I think, especially nurses who do something for public health and public good, can't be quantified. And particularly if they're taking over with a lot of things. So I think it comes to a point where we're just kind of finding out what these industries are dealing with and suffering, because we've had such a spotlight on the labor movement. And I think that the more that we see these industries come out, the more there's probably going to be something along the lines of, hey, this is what we should be getting paid, especially if you live in the most expensive city in the nation. I think that's got to be.
And listen, and the most difficult people coming in with stab wounds and gunshot wounds and illness, or not even that bad shape, but they need love and health care because they don't get it anywhere else. I mean, and you're dealing with the most personal of issues. I mean, what can I tell you? So I'm rooting for our nurses. That's all. I hope that they're satisfied. That's my own point of view. Listen, Robbie Sequeria from the Bronx Times, you're the best. There is never enough time. Maybe we should do a 3-hour show or podcast.
I would love to.
Because we'd never get out of the room. Listen, you're the best. And you're going to enjoy our next segment coming up right after this. We're going to visit with somebody who's going to educate all of us about a lot of very important things. So don't go away.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad.
Thanks for hearing me out, bro.
Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
Dear moms and dads, what you have achieved here today is going to help us and our futures. It is why we are coming up on stage to collect your diplomas.
You know it's true.
Mom, we love you always.
Everything I do,
When you graduate, they graduate. Visit finishyourdiploma.org to find free and supportive adult education centers near you.
Hey, boss. Okay?
I said I'm fine.
see you in the morning with the frosted Superman, but it wasn't on it, and we lost it.
You can talk to me.
It's been really, really hard for me.
You're not gonna get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mom
like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
All right, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. And now I'm going to an old friend who's fighting for some of the same things I believe in. I can't deny that. My buddy Daniel Lanzilotta, who is, he's known as, let's see, the plastician magician. Is that what the publication, Inc. publication
Yes,
said?
that's what they tagged me as.
And so let's just start at the beginning for people who don't know this rather remarkable story, an individual story, because I don't know anybody like you. Why did you one day say, you know what, I think I'm going to collect every piece of plastic I see?
How did it happen?
It's crazy, I know, but how did that happen?
It found me. I was living in the southwest of France with my son on the beach. I lived about 10 blocks away from the Atlantic Ocean at the time in the southwest of France in Biarritz, France. And I would sit there and I would play with my son making things. And then I started noticing stuff, and then one thing led to another. And then some time went by. The trash at the time in 1993, 94, 95 was pretty bad. And by the time I went back again, I had gone back and forth quite often. In 2014, I went back to do a show, an art show. And I started going out looking to collect plastics again. So I took a walk along the same beaches I had taken walks many times before in the early days of this.
Right.
And
so now it's about 10 years.
Yeah, it was insane. It was like
it
went from my ankle up to my knee.
Well, let's move it forward now. And I'll give you two things. Number one, so you have, from that moment, every beach you go to, including Orchard Beach and, Coney Island or out on Long Island, you pick up plastic. And
Bronx River, yeah. I'm constantly collecting plastic debris.
And then the second part of my two-part thing here is that there is no way to separate your doing that while you're an artist and a designer and all that kind of stuff. There's no way to separate that from the political point of view that this is wrong. And you taught me this years ago on TV, that we have got to figure out a new way of packaging our stuff.
Well, it's
much larger than that, but you taught me that.
I try not to make it a political thing, but it becomes more and more that way. But
well,
now
people like me drag it out of you. Go ahead, say it again. I'm sorry.
It's become more philosophical for me, because the journey has been from my son being 3 years old. He's now 28, so 25 years of this, and it's become a spiritual quest, and now it's become a quantum physics thing for me. So I've been reading and studying quantum physics and how this applies to who we are as human beings, that we come from this one source. So over the years, right before COVID, about 2 years before COVID, I started collecting crack vials.
I was going to ask you to show us so these are crack vials. Can you hold up the jar or bowl that you have?
It would be hard to do that, because I would have to move the camera, but
because it's so
I have
large.
Thousands of them. Thousands.
And where have these crack vials been? Oh, there you go. There's a picture. Anderson put that picture up. Where have these been picked up from?
I've been collecting them from Harlem, Brooklyn, and the South Bronx.
And before, and I do want to show some more artwork, because an Inc. Publications, was correct in talking about and showing some of your artwork. But what is the end piece? Or the end piece is something larger than you generally will be able to do on your own?
Well, the crack thing became at the time I was living in Harlem in 2019 to 21 or something like that, and I started seeing crack vials, and I started seeing them as a single stream plastic in the environment and what that impact was. And then as I started collecting them, COVID happened, and I went back to collect them again as COVID tamed down. But then I made a connection between what a crack vial is. So a crack vial, this tiny little object here, if you could see that one, I'll get a better one. If you could see that crack vial, it's very tiny. It not only is the vial toxic and insane as a single-use stream of plastic, but the content of it is insanely poisonous. But it's also equivalent to this kind of thing. So this is a plastic laundry detergent bottle, and the contents of this product is also toxic and poisonous, and we're using it to wash our clothes. And then you wonder why we have the issues we have.
So you look at volume, okay? I don't know how many of those little crack vials you could fit into that laundry detergent. Now, there are people who would say, well, you're exaggerating the amount
Well,
of
no, what
poison in the laundry
no,
detergent. But I'm just saying, in terms of volume, your laundry detergent and your bowl of crack vials are almost the same.
No,
No?
this is thousands of this is 1,000, 15,000, 20,000 times worse because of the content. So there's always a residual amount of crack in this.
Mm-hmm.
And so when this hits the ground, that's where my concern became important to me, because I started to try to understand what the impact of the runoff of this product, this toxic waste, and what does this really represent as an item, as a crack vial. This is a new form of enslavement. That's what this is. This represents broken people, because when I go to collect these things, I actually speak to a lot of the people who use this stuff. I don't just go and collect. I actually have conversations with folks, and it's heartbreaking to me. It's heart-wrenching, because it's affecting our community, and it's affecting Black and brown communities.
Give me one.
It's epidemic. It's
got
insanity.
it. Give me one story that they've told you. Something that explains what you just explained.
I was in there about a month or two ago in Marcus Garvey Park in particular. I wear my art pieces when I go out into the world, and I was collecting. There were 3 or 4 crack users on a bench, and I was close enough to this woman called over to me, and she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh," I went over to her and I spoke to her just like a normal person, no big deal. And we had a conversation. And
what did she say?
And what she said was that she has been written up in New York Times. Her name is Chanel, about her situation. It's
which is what?
The homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was also speaking to the single-use item as a plastic in the environment. She got that immediately. She was articulate, she was smart, and she looked at me and she says, "Look where I am." She was
sitting on the beach without a home.
Heartwarming to me. She blew my mind, and I realized that I have to say something. I have to stand up and speak for the disenfranchised.
So for all of the stuff that you've done, and I want to show some of the jewelry and the same thing that Ink Publication put out. You've now morphed to some degree, aside from just collecting plastics and the little straws that go into your Starbucks cup and everything else. Right. You have now morphed to say, well, wait a minute, this is even more toxic than that other stuff that I had been working on.
It's toxic on so many levels. And for me, I'm born and raised in the Bronx. I come from multi ethnicities. I identify as a brown person, and so when I go into my community, I'm heartbroken to see what's happening with just the crack. And what that means.
Do you see yourself, as an artist and a creator and an advocator, moving even into getting to the social causes that drive people to use this kind of drug? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
You do see yourself. So I mean, this is a very interesting story, and again, we want to credit Ink Publication for putting it out. Although we've been talking about these things for a long time, is that the whole story morphed from your upsetness with plastic, taking it all the way to now say, wait a minute, there are social ills that make even the plastic worse.
Right, because my tagline for my work is, for many years now, has been, I bring significance to the seemingly insignificant. So when I
hold some stuff, and we have some stuff we can show. Go ahead.
So when I make something, right? So this is a piece called
Put it in front of the camera if you mind. Put it in front of the camera there. Wow. And that's all plastic you created.
This is such a beautiful piece. It's got cigarette lighters, straws, toys. It's insane, this piece.
And these are all things you picked up.
Yes, this is all trash from the streets or the beaches. So each piece, like a cigarette lighter, if you could see the cigarette lighter there.
We can.
So when that's on the street, a cigarette lighter is one of the worst things in the environment. It's right up there with crack vials.
So if you have one, what do you do with it?
Excuse me?
If you have one, and there are many people who have them, what do you do with them? Can you throw them away?
That's a social dilemma that people have made a choice. You're making choices. as you do every day with your life. So the choice about plastic is the solution for me at the moment. It's been my platform all along, is not to use it. Don't use it. Don't buy it. Stop it. And that's
even as difficult as that is. I mean, listen, you got to really shun plastic bags. Start there to walk away from them, because every place you go, they're offering you plastic. Anyway, show some more stuff. You have some jewelry to show.
My latest piece is this dedication to women. This is made with about 1,500 to 2,000 handmade beads. So I collect plastic, I punch the plastic out, and then I string them together using broom bristles.
Wow.
So there'll be this is a ceremonial piece celebrating women. And so that piece and this piece here, this is a piece that's dedicated to the Eve gene, which is the mitochondria original gene that's originates all of humanity from Africa, Black women. This piece is specifically dedicated to Black women and where we come from. So it's an interesting thing to look at it from a genetic point of view and to follow it back that far.
Maybe we'll go like this. And how I started, or somewhere along the way toward the beginning, I asked about the end game. Now, you're doing all this stuff. Part of the end game, of course, is to be an artist, make a couple of dollars being an artist. That wouldn't be the worst thing of all. But is there an end game, or you're just going to keep putting it out until you don't have enough materials to work with?
Well, that's not going to happen anytime soon. I talk to a lot of artists. I follow a lot of people, and I go to a lot of cultural events and openings, and everybody out there is buying their art supplies. I never buy my art supplies. I just go outside and I
go to the beach.
Wherever I'm sitting or standing. The plastic is literally, we're drowning in it everywhere we turn.
Do you go through garbage bags? I mean,
It's very rare that I go through a garbage bag.
Wait, hold on. My audio just cut out. Say that again. I'm sorry, Dan.
I don't usually go through a garbage bag, but the nice thing about garbage bags, if I'm taking a garbage walk in one of the boroughs, Bronx, Manhattan, wherever, Brooklyn, those bags are clear plastic, so I could see it. I don't have to really go like crazy. And sometimes I see some toys, and then I get excited by the toys.
Listen, you have a point of view that you are 1,000% dedicated to, and I have to tell you, I interview a lot of people. I talk about environmental, I talk about artists. I don't know anybody else who does what Daniel Lanzilotta does. Check him out in Ink Publications, right?
Yes, you have the link.
And if you find something in the street of interest, contact Daniel Lanzilotta.
People do.
I'm sure they do. And so thank you so much, Dan, for joining us.
Thank you, Gary.
I'm sure we will extend the conversation to the next time you come on the program.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Okay, folks, that will do it for the Bronx Buzz. You know what happens next? We thank Anderson, who's the producer. We will say, I'll see you next week. Good night.